Good mythical afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Ayala with Unit 7, Section 2, Creating the Constitution. So we're going to be talking about the Articles of Confederation and how we begin to create our new Constitution. Please make sure that you're writing your notes and that you complete the information needed to put your vlog question in, and you put it down in the doobly-doo, the discussion board, or wherever direction it is this year. So please sit back, relax, and enjoy this short presentation. So why did we need a new constitution? Well, we've always spoken about the Articles of Confederation being too weak. They really had no teeth, and it was very difficult for anything to get done. And that was a major issue. Number two was Shays' Rebellion. And this showed how a small group of farmers can threaten the national government. And if a small group of farmers can threaten a national government, I really don't think your national government is working. So you might need to redo that. And that's what we do. So the Constitutional Convention took place in 1787 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as we spoke before, our de facto capital. It included many famous people like George Washington, who was the president of the convention, Benjamin Franklin, who was in his 80s at this time, and James Madison, who's also known as the father or the writer of the Constitution. But there were some people who were left out. No women, African Americans, or Native Americans weren't invited or even allowed in. And that was a major concern and problem. So this was what we needed to balance. Was delegates needed to make a government that protected people's rights on one hand and maintained order on at the same time. So we had to try to balance these ideas of security and liberty. And that was a concern because we didn't want a tyrannical government that had too much protection but not enough liberty. And we didn't want too much liberty so that all craziness happened like under Shays' Rebellion and the Articles. So the government had to be limited. But how do we figure that out? How do we limit our government and keep balance? So the first thing is we get two plans emerging. And these two plans are mostly based on how should representation be looked at. Who should have it? Should be equal, with all states having the same. Should be based on population. Should be a merge of two. Also, there's going to talk about how the government should actually be structured. Should there be a legislative, judicial, and an executive branch? Just an executive and legislator? Just a legislator like the Articles? Well, let's see what happens. The first one is the Virginia Plan, which has three branches of government. The executive branch, which enforces the law, a legislative branch, which makes the laws, and representation in these branches, where on the legislative branch had two bodies, an upper and lower house, but they were both represented based on population, and a judicial branch which would judge laws. So what you had is you had the three-branch setup with equal and balanced power, but the legislative branch instead it had two bodies, but both of them each on population. So the large states end up liking this plan. Do you know why? I bet you can figure it out. Moving on to New Jersey. They also have three branches of government: executive, legislative, and executive, judicial, and legislative. My bad. But the big thing was that there was only one body in the legislature with only one vote per state. So Virginia is based on population. New Jersey's was equal representation based on the states. So the small states like this. Can you figure this out why? Well, I bet you can. So we get to what we call the Great Compromise or the Connecticut Compromise. So we took up the same idea. We have three branches of government. We have two bodies in the legislature. And this is where it changes from the Virginia plan. We have an upper body called the Senate. Hint, called the Senate, an upper body with equal representation based on the states, which is two. Then we have a lower body, the House of Representatives, which representation is based on population, just like what Virginia wanted. And the upper body with equal representation, just like New Jersey wanted, my bad. And they come together to make the Connecticut Compromise, also known as the Great Compromise. So from there, we go to slavery and representation. So we know representation in the lower house in the legislature is based on population. But how do you count as slaves? The southern states want slaves to count because if they count as a person, they get more representation, which means more power in this new government. Well, the northern states said they're not citizens, so why should they count for representation? So we had to have this conversation. Why is this an issue? Why would the southern states, if all slaves counted, would have more representation and more power based on their relative population, while the northern states, which have no slaves, would have less power if slaves counted. But should the slaves count? Because they are people, but they don't have rights. Troubling. So what we come up with is this idea of the 3/5 compromise. And what this was a compromise that 3/5 of the slave population will be counted towards population. And it says that slavery could be banned or cannot be banned until 1808, because that was really what a lot of the founders were thinking, that slavery will disappear slowly but surely, but we're not quite ready for that, so let's put this at a date further down. My question to you is, did this actually happen? We had a fight. So, the articles also had an issue with regulating trade, because all these states had different currencies. How did you know? It would fluctuate from one day from another. So what this national government does, it says they can regulate trade among the states and foreign powers, but they would not put an export tax on anything. They didn't believe in that. So they were able to say, hey, New York and New Jersey, you can trade across state lines, but I'm going to regulate that when that happens. In your own state, you can regulate that the way you feel that is best fit for your state. Yet again, this comes up with the idea of federalism. The idea that we have a national government and then state and local governments underneath. And they each deal with their own certain ideas. Sometimes their powers will overlap, but most of the times they won't. And that's what's kind of interesting about this government, is we have the three branches that are separate but equal, that balance power, so that no branch can get too powerful and become tyrannical. We have the idea of federalism to regulate trade, education, stuff that is based on the state. Because we wanted the national government to be limited, that could only do certain things. We didn't want a national government that can do everything. So we limit it and we put it inside the Constitution. But there's a problem. And that's for another time. So, here's your question. Which compromise, the Great Compromise or the 3/5 compromise, do you think will most likely lead to conflict later? Most likely lead to conflict later. I do apologize about that typo. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.